Well, my friends, it is that time of year again. Another year has come to a close, and thus it is time for me to come here and tell you about my favorite movies that came out in 2024. 2024 was a really big year for me personally. I came into it pretty low, but graduated film school, met the love of my life, and then took a risk on myself and moved all the way across the country to Los Angeles, something I never thought I would be brave enough to do. With this being such a big year for personal growth and personal responsibility, there were a lot of movies that I didn't see, as is the case with every year, but this year especially. So if your favorite movie didn't make the list, I'm sorry, I'm trying. And finally, you may notice the scenery being quite different from previous years, with having recently lost David Lynch, who I consider a very important figure in film. I wanted to record this little intro bit on Mulholland Drive. I drive it every day, so I thought it might be a nice little tribute. Before we get into the list, a few honorable mentions: Memoir of a Snail, Juror Number 2, Sonic the Hedgehog 3, Robot Dreams, The Peasants, Carry On, and Stop Motion. Also not an honorable mention, but special shout out to that new 4K restoration of Seven Samurai. Saw it on my birthday. That shit rocks. Starting at number 15, it's going to be In a Violent Nature by Chris Nash. I saw a lot of divided opinions on this movie on the internet and in my own friend circles, but the more I thought about it and sat with it, the more I came to really, really enjoy it. When I think about a movie like In a Violent Nature, I try to think about what it is aiming for, and I think what Violent Nature is aiming for is being a mood piece more than being a compelling or strict narrative, and I think it succeeds in that. The cinematography, the sound, the slow melodic pace that goes through. I know a lot of people like to shit on how slow the movie is, but to me it just built the atmosphere in a way that really resonated with me. Not to mention the kills in this thing. I mean, it's a horror movie, you gotta have good kills. In a Violent Nature has some incredible gore throughout. Number 14 is going to be a movie I've been excited for since I first saw it over a year ago, and that is Kill. Now, I don't blame you if Kill flew under your radar. It got a very, very limited theater release here in the US, but I cannot recommend tracking it down enough. The thing that makes Kill really unique is it starts off a very simple martial arts story set on a commuter train. Fair enough. As the story goes on, the protagonist morphs from a martial artist on a revenge tour to a full-blown psychopath, a borderline horror villain in how they are mutilating and displaying the bodies of the enemies. But he feels justified in it all, which makes for a really compelling viewing experience. Highly recommend. Number 13 is going to be the newest movie from Jeremy Saulnier, Rebel Ridge, a movie I would have liked to see in the theaters. Jeremy Saulnier is the master of creating these impossible scenarios for his protagonists. Green Room is one of my absolute favorite thrillers in the world, and Blue Ruin is an incredible viewing experience as well. I think what sets Rebel Ridge apart from those two is that the protagonist, instead of being a helpless everyman like those other two movies, in Rebel Ridge, it's an ex-Marine who is a absolute combat machine. The stakes feel much more even while still feeling like the protagonist is trapped in a way. Saulnier is also a master of grounding his stories in our reality in a way where Rebel Ridge feels like it could have happened in real life somewhere in middle America. The characters all feel very real and fleshed out, but not in a way that becomes disengaging the way that hyper-realistic dialogue often will, for me at least. And the final act just feels like the ultimate payoff for everything we'd seen up to that point. So Rebel Ridge is an incredible viewing experience. Number 12 is a very simple movie, but one that hits a lot of notes that really spoke to me. That's going to be Snack Shack. When you're a kid growing up in the Midwest, and it's summer break, there's not a whole lot to do because you live in the Midwest, you gotta find the fun in life or fall down a depressive spiral. It's a feeling I'm very familiar with, and it's a feeling that Snack Shack portrays very well. The idea of going outside during summer break and thinking, what could we possibly do next in this, our suburban hellscape? Snack Shack's presentation is overall really smart because it has the moments with the fast pacing and the kinetic editing, and then it has the moments where it'll slow down and sort of let an emotion breathe and let a feeling sort of ride out. And I think that ebb and flow of it makes for a very easy but very enjoyable viewing experience, and it engages you far more than you would expect from a coming-of-age movie like this. Number 11, one of the last movies I watched last year, Perfect Days, directed by Wim Wenders. I was not familiar with Wenders or their work before watching Perfect Days, but I absolutely will be going forward because Perfect Days was just an incredibly beautiful viewing experience. I think slice of life can be pretty hit or miss on whether or not you can create a compelling viewing experience, or you go too far into the mundane and you end up getting pretty boring. Perfect Days manages to find the stunning beauty in the mundane. It almost felt like I was watching photos from a photo album that had come to life to show me the full story of the photos, and it felt so poetic in the way that it repeats information and then the way that it shakes up information as you follow one man in his seemingly very mundane life. The performance here by Koji Yakusho is also incredibly layered in the sense that we can tell this is a character who is genuinely happy, set in their ways, but below the surface there is a sadness or a longing that is so subtly weaved into the narrative that it really is beautiful, and it rewards being actively very engaged with the performance, and it helps discourage looking away from the screen when the scenes are, for all intents and purposes, very mundane. If you're going to watch Perfect Days, I would be ready to lock in and pay attention, because I promise it will be rewarding. Like watching Van Gogh being painted in real time. It is just so beautiful in its craft, and it will spur a lot of introspection. Number 10 is a movie that a lot of people, myself included, probably expect to be higher on a list like this, but it is Dune Part 2 by Denis Villeneuve. Now, as somebody who was not a fan of the first Dune movie whatsoever, I think Dune Part 2 is an incredible entry into the greater tapestry of sci-fi cinema. Dune Part 2 succeeds in making the expanse of space feel massive and making worlds within this fictional universe feel very real and very distant from each other. The contrast between Arrakis and the Harkonnen planet are visually very clear, and stylistically it helps to give an idea of separation. And Dune Part 2 has a very complex plot, but at no point did I feel lost. I had a very good idea of what pieces were on the board at any given moment. I think that's really hard to do, and that's what really captivated me about Dune Part 2. It elevates on the first movie in almost every way, turning a non-believer like myself into a big fan. I'm very curious to see what's going to happen in the third movie. At number 9, one of my most unexpected bangers of 2024, Alex Garland's Civil War. Now, if you're like me, and you saw the trailers for Civil War, you probably thought it was going to be some grand political statement on the current climate of U.S. politics, a climate that's not very cool to be in right now. But surprisingly and thankfully, Civil War takes a stance on the human condition and on character psychology with a backdrop of American politics. It doesn't lean left or right. It has a lot to say about humans and about human desire in the face of great stress or adversity. Much of the experience with Civil War is an event taking place and multiple characters witnessing it and seeing everybody's very different but very real and fleshed out reactions to it. It's very, very gripping from a character standpoint, and every single performance is perfectly in place in this movie. I think Civil War is one of the better acted movies that came out last year, hands down. Just an incredibly gripping experience, especially in the cinematography and the sound in those moments of tension being built. And then you'll get a nice long break to release it, and then you'll tense right back up. It's a very taxing experience to watch Civil War, but in a good way, the way a thriller should be. At number 8, a movie that a lot of people moved on from way too quickly, in my opinion, is going to be The Bike Riders. Bike Riders is one of those next day movies where the day I saw it, I took it in and I thought it was awesome. And then the next day, my mind came back to it and I really appreciated the layers in its storytelling and in its messaging that I didn't get upon first viewing. This movie has a lot of similarities to Fight Club in the sense that if you watched it, especially if you're a man, and you saw this lifestyle as being cool or something to aspire to, I don't think you got the point of the movie, and you're horribly misrepresenting what this movie is about, because the beginning of The Bike Riders builds up this image of masculinity, of this motorcycle gang in the 60s in Chicago, tough guys, leather jackets, and then over the course of the movie, piece by piece, it dismantles that idea of a man and shows how destructive the pursuit of this hyper-masculine lifestyle is in a way that is very, very meticulously and artistically done that I don't think the movie got nearly enough credit for upon release. And of course, Tom Hardy and Austin Butler, two of the hottest performers right now. I think they both turn in some incredible performances. Austin Butler's in this movie, I think, will be talked about years later when he is deeper into his career. I think it definitely deserves to be in a conversation, especially for the subtleties of it. And Tom Hardy trying to do an American accent is just always gonna make me have a good time. Not to mention the look and the feel of Bike Riders in these big, beautiful group shots where there's a ton of people riding a ton of motorcycles all on camera at the same time. It instills the feeling of movies aren't the same anymore that I don't like to feel, because I think it's a pretty boomer generalization to say that, but packing all those people into the frame and getting everybody coordinated like that, it's legitimately impressive and something you don't see much anymore. So I have to tip my hat to the ADs on organizing all of those extras and all of their motorcycles too. It's not like they're sitting in an arena or walking around. They're on motorcycles. At number 7, we have one of my more emotional journeys with a movie this year, The Wild Robot. Now, from the surface, there's a lot of great things to say about The Wild Robot. The art style is very beautiful. The performances are all very good. But what I came to appreciate about The Wild Robot more than anything else is its camera. Animation nowadays, and especially in a post-Lord and Miller world of animation, it feels like everything is kinetic, everything is fast, everything is a billion jokes happening per minute, and gags in the background, gags in the foreground. There's just always something vying for your attention. The Wild Robot takes a very slowed down and deliberate approach to its camera. It holds on shots, these nice, wide, beautiful shots of scenery. The movement is very fluid and very deliberate. It's a movie that lets the visuals breathe and opens itself up to the beauty of its art in a way that animation, I feel, has been losing over the last few years. There were a lot of shots in The Wild Robot that genuinely took my breath away, and it is all just a perfectly crafted package for a very beautiful story with very deep themes. Obviously, the themes pertain mostly to parenthood, but I think they are well crafted enough to be applied to any situation, such as a relationship or love for a sibling. It doesn't restrict itself by being strictly about parenthood. Yes, the story is parenthood, but the themes are more universal than that. The themes are love and care and living up to potential and the pursuit of something greater than your circumstances. As of a couple days ago, The Wild Robot is up for Best Animated Feature. Honestly, I think it should be up for Best Picture, but I would be very surprised if it didn't walk away with the victory. Number 6 is going to be another big tearjerker for me, and that is Didi. Didi was very indicative of what 2024's theme in movies was, and that is directors making a very personal artistic statement. Didi shows this suburban lifestyle of a very specific era and has such specific details and circumstances to it that you can feel the lived experience of the filmmaker through the pictures on screen. Obviously, Didi has a lot of stock to me personally because it is a younger sibling growing up in the suburbs. You know, that was me. There's so many moments in this movie that felt so specific to my coming of age experience that I couldn't help but be saddened by it, and at the same time feel like that experience is recognized in a very beautiful and real way. Things like trying to fit in, things like overselling how good you are at something to seem cooler, or when you don't have a good relationship with your sibling, but something brings you closer to them. There's a moment in this movie where two characters just sit in a car and it's quiet for 2 seconds. And I don't think I've cried that hard at anything else that came out in 2024. So I have to give Didi credit for its authenticity and how organic everything feels in the movie. It's time to get into the top 5, and honestly, this might be my hardest top 5 yet. All 5 of these movies could very easily be number 1, but that wouldn't make for a very good list. Keep in mind, everything is within 0.0001% of each other, okay? Number 5, hands down the funniest movie I've seen in a long time. It is Hundreds of Beavers. No movie has ever boiled down to, for the love of the game, quite like Hundreds of Beavers. Another thing I love about Hundreds of Beavers is the way it wears its influences on its sleeve, but simultaneously has influences that you don't expect. You watch the trailer, and yes, you can tell there's a big Looney Tunes and Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin influence. Then you get into it and you find things like Legend of Zelda. You find things like dark comedy, things you never would have anticipated coming from a movie like this, but it uses all of these influences in a very cohesive way. This movie sits perfectly at the center of everything that influences it in a really cool way. Nothing is being ripped off, nothing is being derivative. It is original in how it's influenced, which is just the perfect balance that you could strike with something with as much style and as much of a unique quality as Hundreds of Beavers. I highly encourage you to watch this with a lot of people if you can. It is an absolute joy. The difference in watching it at home versus in a theater was unbelievable. Number 4 is going to be a movie that took me a while to come around to after the first viewing, but I just could not let the genius go unrecognized. That's going to be Furiosa from George Miller. I absolutely love the Mad Max movies. I love the world. I love the style. I think Fury Road is one of the best movies post-2000. I think the original movies have a lot of really awesome stuff too. And it's just such a world of its own that has seen its influence all across media. And I think Furiosa is easily one of the most interesting entries into that greater landscape of content. The first time I saw Furiosa, I made the mistake of watching Fury Road in the same day. And I think while these movies are so close and having a central protagonist shared between them, from a technical standpoint and a philosophical standpoint, I don't think they could be more different, and that is awesome. Fury Road is a movie about getting from point A to point B in space. It is very simple in its story, but complex in its setups and in its set pieces. Furiosa is almost the opposite, where it is about getting from point A to point B in time with a lot of complex story beats in between, but with a character at the focus and with a more measurable arc than you really see in Fury Road. And in Fury Road, the camera is locked off and it puts the action right at the center and makes it very easy to follow this very fast-paced action. Furiosa takes almost a completely different approach with this smooth camera that holds takes for longer and moves you through the scene of battle almost like a video game. This movie manages to take a complete 180 on its camera philosophy and end up being just as gripping, if not more, than Fury Road was. Furiosa just continues to prove that this world of Mad Max is very lived in by both Miller and all of the actors. Have to give it up to Chris Hemsworth for what is easily the performance of his career. He just does an incredible job playing this larger-than-life, almost comic book-esque villain, but in a way that never felt unbelievable for the setting and the circumstances. I think he really found a groove playing this character. Number 3 might be the most pure, concentrated example of that idea of a director making an artistic statement, with their movie, and that's going to be Jane Schoenbrunn with I Saw the TV Glow. Now, even though I am a cisgendered heterosexual male, TV Glow really spoke to me and engaged me in its story and its themes. It is really important for media like this to have that effect on audiences that it doesn't necessarily pertain to exclusively. I think TV Glow does that beautifully, where I feel like I got a lot out of it on first viewing, and then in reading the perspectives of people different from me, I got even more out of it and just came to appreciate the beauty of the film even more. The storytelling and the subtext was all very masterfully done. I think from a technical standpoint too, this is some of the most beautiful lighting I've ever seen. I don't think any movie has had more imaginative lighting setups than TV Glow. I think I would watch it with the sound off before watching a lot of other things sound on. It's just a beautiful movie. As was the case with Wild Robot, the messaging is universal without being vague. It touches on themes of childhood and of nostalgia, and obviously speaks to the experience of trans youth, especially of this time period. But even beyond that, there's just so much to dig into with TV Glow, a lot that I am not knowledgeable enough to speak on at length. I encourage you to seek out more discussion about TV Glow if you're interested, but from a storytelling standpoint, the visuals, the lighting, writing, just everything about TV Glow is so smart and natural and creative. Capital C creative is how I would describe it. Ooh, number 2. This might have been my most anticipated movie that came out in 2024. That is going to be Dev Patel starring in and directing Monkey Man. Now, action and martial arts are some of my favorite genres in all of film, and I think about action a lot and sort of the timeline and progression that it's gone on, and I think Monkey Man represents a perfect natural conclusion to the trajectory of action movies since the year 2000. Early 2000s, we hit a stride of really jittery cameras and incomprehensible scenes. When John Wick came around in that sort of era, a lot of things got cleaned up. The cameras are holding for longer, the choreography is very clean, but for a little bit, especially around John Wick 3, that started to get a little boring because it was all too perfect. Monkey Man manages to strike a perfect balance between that dirtiness and that real grittiness of the early 2000s and the masterful choreography and the deliberate camera of the John Wick era, we'll call it. I think it's also really cool to see a movie like this in a setting and a culture that is very unfamiliar to a lot of Americans. It is really engaging in that way, where it doesn't feel like it is talking down to the white American audience or engaging in stereotype to get the point across. In the interviews and the marketing and everything, you can tell how real this movie is to Patel as he was directing and starring in it. And I think that comes across beautifully on screen. And it makes enough creative choices to really justify itself and stand out in the landscape of action movies of this vein. I think Monkey Man is absolutely a first ballot contender for cult classic status, especially if there doesn't end up being any sort of follow-up or sequel. But I think Dev Patel definitely makes a case for being one of the best debut actor turned directors in recent memory, and I really hope we get to see this side of his artistic influence a lot more. Number 1 is a movie I think I was in denial about making number 1 for a really long time because it's not a popular movie. Dare I say, most people don't like this movie. Most people don't like this filmmaker either. When I put this filmmaker among my favorite filmmakers, it's always met with a raised eyebrow or skepticism, but I think it's truly special when a filmmaker can have so many qualities that really speak to an aspiring filmmaker like myself. And when I think about the reasons that I watch movies, the reasons I go to the movies, it is for the escapism, it is for the thrill, it is to be engaged in a story, it's to be entertained by a performance, it's to be all of these things. So when I look at a movie like Trap, there's nothing else that I could possibly ask for from the movie. The premise is straight up genius. It is a perfect cat and mouse story where the mouse is trapped inside of a cage made out of cats, if that metaphor makes sense. I kind of lost it there for a second, but every actor-director combo should aspire to have what Shyamalan and Josh Hartnett have in this movie. Most people are on the same page. These two are on the same syllable. The thing that makes Shyamalan's movies so special to me is that none of the characters live in our world. None of them come from our world. If you took Cooper out of this movie and you placed him into our world, he's getting caught immediately because this guy does everything to make his presence off-putting to everybody he comes across. But because nobody else in the movie lives in our world, he gets away with it. And it is so fun to see that happen. And it's so engaging to see him weasel his way out of every little situation. And every time something goes well for him, I can't wait to see how things go bad and then to see how he gets out of it. It creates such an engaging viewing experience and is written in such a way that the constant back and forth is very, very natural and flows very well. I also think the fact that the marketing of the movie completely hid the third act is pure genius. And as soon as we took that turn from Act 2 into Act 3, I sat up in my seat. I was so excited to see how things unfolded because it takes a turn you really cannot expect. And from Shyamalan's most straightforward movie, story-wise, having it be so tight like this is exactly what serves it the best. I think this movie is also shot incredibly well. It was recorded on film, which lends to the look of it where it feels both classic Hollywood and modern filmmaking philosophy. It doesn't feel outdated, but it also doesn't feel trendy or of the modern era the way that some other movies do. Not everybody liked Trap. A lot of people call me crazy for liking Trap as much as I do, but a lot of things that people don't like about it are the exact reasons that I keep coming back to it. It's funny, it's gripping, it's engaging, it's thrilling, it's just a movie. Thanks for watching. How much distance will I get out of the microphone? Oh, just enough. Perfect.